we have to talk about Jett Luchanko. I know that people feel a certain kind of way, and I see it in the comments. There are a lot of people who feel a whole lot of ways about Jett Luchanko, and they feel about how the Flyers made a mistake in drafting him, and that Steve Buium was a better pick, and that it was a total disaster class in reaching for a player who's not at the level of where he was selected in the first round. So the Flyers had a decision to make. They could keep Jett Luchanko at the NHL level, and they could try their damnedest to stretch this thing out as long as possible, and they could try to keep him up here as long as possible with the 9-game tryout, and then eventually send him back. There was a thought that they could do a conditioning stint and then bring him back. But then there was a thought that if they do the conditioning stint, he was going to have to stay at the NHL level after that. So today, the Flyers put everything to rest. They're not going to continue out the 9-game tryout, as it were. They are simply sending him back to Guelph. So the Flyers put this out this morning. We have returned forward Jett Luchanko to his junior team, Storm City, in the OHL. So that's good old Guelph. Now, Guelph is apparently having a better season than they have had in recent years, and we could go about this a few different ways. Now, I've been pretty clear how I feel about the selection of Jett Luchanko. I thought at the time it was a stretch. I thought at the time this was trying to big brain their way into a player that I just wasn't totally sold on being the guy at that spot. And then the Flyers, in doing so, ultimately passed over Steve Buium. And I kind of go back to the easiest comparison, right? The one that people like to point back to the most is that there was a time not that long ago where the Flyers traded down and passed on Cole Caulfield twice and took Cam York instead. And I have not been the biggest Cam York fan. He's looked pretty good this year so far. But Cole Caulfield is a dynamic scorer and somebody that this team certainly could have used, a sniper that this team could have used. And it's very easy to look at Jett Luchanko going back to his junior team at 19 years of age and then look over in Minnesota and see Steve Buium as a 19-year-old having a meaningful impact for the Wild. Granted, a lot of it is coming on the power play. And granted, nobody says that he is a top pair defenseman right now at 19. Nobody believes that. Nobody expects that. But when you look at these players side by side and say, these guys were both available, you chose Jett instead of Zeev, this feels like the continuation of the curse. I don't know how to make anybody feel better. It's also not my job to make anybody feel better. I have no idea what his season at Guelph is going to look like. I understand the frustrations of the fan base that look at a guy like Steve Buium, who this team decided not to draft. Was it because he had the same agent as Cutter Gauthier? I don't know. I understand the frustration. I understand the thought process that the Flyers probably felt good about their young defenseman and said, you know, we really need a center. Let's take Luchanko because we think he's going to be the best center at that point in the draft. And they went for need, not for best available player, which they have done in the past. They most notably did that with the Nolan Patrick pick, where Ron Hextall went against the scouts who wanted Heiskanen, not Makar. Still a defenseman, and still a very good defenseman. It was not the entire room said, Makar, you're an idiot. No, it was Heiskanen. We're not quite there, but I will say that it's really frustrating because there are 19-year-old players and 20-year-old players who are making an impact in this league right now. Now, Jett Luchanko wasn't taken number 1 overall, so it would be unfair to say, hey, Matthew Schaefer is 19. He got drafted number 1 overall. He's playing a harder position, arguably, as a young guy. He's playing a role that's more difficult, more demanding of him than what the Flyers were. Flyers are pretty much saying, hey, can you be a 3C, maybe a 4C for right now? Can you dominate play enough that you force our hand to having to play you? He couldn't. That's not necessarily an indictment on the player. That doesn't necessarily mean that the player hasn't done a good enough job of trying to improve his game, but I'm not sure that he was the right guy. And that's okay. I mean, it's not, but it is. It's the reality. We could go back and we can complain and bitch and moan and relitigate that draft and do 15 redrafting mock drafts of that draft and say the wrong pick was Jett Luchanko. We could do that. I choose not to live in that world. I can acknowledge that Steve Buium right now, as things are currently set up, looks like he might be a more impactful player long-term than Jett Luchanko. I will also, I guess, give a little bit of grace to the Flyers and to Luchanko and to Guelph that somebody's going to teach this kid how to shoot the fucking puck. Because the one thing that I simply cannot stomach is the notion that Jett Luchanko has elite passing, elite vision, great speed, great strength for his age. Oh, it's okay that he doesn't shoot the puck. That's fine. Him not having an eye for goal, that doesn't really matter. If he can do all those other things, he'll be a really good player. Well, if he can pass and he can skate and he's strong and he's kind of fast, but he can't really score, you've kind of, in essence, described a bottom six forward, probably a third line guy. When you choose to take Jett Luchanko over Steve Williams, you better not be taking a guy who's going to be a third line center. And here's the one thing that I will tell all of you. Here's the one thing I will tell you that for some reason people are afraid to say in front of the camera, okay? Or write up in their stories. I have talked to a lot of people, okay? It's not one, it's not three, it's not five, it's many people. The overwhelming majority of people that I talk to whose opinions I respect, who have either worked in the game, played the game, covered the game for decades, the vast majority of those people right now think that Jett Luchanko is closer to being a third-line player than being a top-line guy. And based on where he was chosen in his draft, that is unacceptable. It doesn't mean he is doomed to be that guy. But just based on how things have gone to this point, based on the fact that he can't go to the most developmentally appropriate place because of a bullshit rule, and because the OHL are cowards, which is the AHL, he should be in the AHL with the Phantoms. Since he can't be there, he has to go back to Guelph. One of two things is going to happen. He's going to play for Guelph. Guelph is going to be okay. Guelph is going to be bad. I don't think Guelph is going to level up and become a powerhouse. He'll go there. Hopefully, somebody will get through to him. You need to shoot. And maybe he goes down to Guelph. He works on his shooting. He looks like a more well-rounded player. He builds some confidence. He goes and plays at World Junior for Canada. He takes everything that he's worked on this summer with the Flyers and around practices and in some NHL games and then with Guelph. And maybe he finds that scoring touch and he takes it with him to World Juniors. He lights it up. And we all look back on these few months of people saying, man, what a bad pick. Maybe we look back on it and say, what a vast overreaction to a 19-year-old player. It's entirely possible. There's another possibility. Maybe Guelph trades him. Perhaps the Flyers, in some way, shape, or form, communicate to Guelph, look, we're happy to send him back, but it'd be really nice if you could try to move him to another team. Maybe it'll happen. I have no idea. What I do know is that the likelihood of Jett Luchanko returning at the end of this season, once his junior season's over, the idea that he's going to come back here and is going to play meaningful minutes on a potentially playoff-bound Flyers team seems practically non-existent. The only way that it works is if Luchanko absolutely tears up junior, tears up World Junior, and then comes up at the end of the year. And the Flyers to say, you know what, you went from undesirable to undeniable as a player this season. And then he's playing for that team. I don't see it. Here's the other problem. I talked about this on the Press Row show the other night. The real issue isn't even that Luchanko hasn't developed in the way that you would want as a scorer yet. It's not even the fact that he hasn't torn up the OHL yet, which he fucking better this year. If you're going to go back down, you better figure it out. You have to look like a man among boys. You have to absolutely dominate the opposition. If we're looking at a 15-goal season out of Jett Luchanko in junior this year, yeah, then you start sounding a lot of the alarms. There is a path that he could be a productive NHL player. There's a path that maybe he goes to junior, plays well. Maybe he gets a call up here late in the season, does well. Maybe plays in the playoffs, does well. Goes into training camp next year, goes into the preseason, and forces the Flyers' hand, and he makes the team out of camp next year, and he plays meaningful minutes for this team in the 2026-27 season. But man, if he doesn't, and he ends up with the Phantoms in 26-27 and never plays well enough with the Phantoms to force the Flyers' hand to bring him up, and then you say at the end of that season, wow, going into 27-28, will Luchanko ever amount to anything? That's the problem, right? This is his age 19 season. Next year, his age 20 season likely will be in the AHL. If his age 21 season comes around and he hasn't developed that scoring touch and he hasn't forced the Flyers' hand, then I'm concerned. And yeah, you could go back and you could say, hey, 21 for a center is still young. That's true. But there are certain things I look for. Does he have elite vision? He does. Does he have great passing ability? He does. Does he have great speed? He does. Is he strong? Yes. But you have to be a well-rounded player to be a top 6 forward in this league. And if he's going to play as a potential 1C or 2C, I have no idea where he's going to be. But if that's his goal, he has to find a scoring touch. If he doesn't, he's a third-line guy. He's a faster he'd be like a faster Scott Lawton with better vision. That's not good enough. Evan Atkins says, Briere saying Jett made this decision easy for them is extremely troubling. Kid doesn't have it. So the Briere quotes, I think it was Charlie O'Connor put them out. So we will credit Charlie. Let me find the transcription of it because there were 2 quotes that Danny gave today to the media. And I kind of went, All right, so here we go. Let's pull up Charlie O'Connor's tweet and his transcription from earlier today. Shout out to Charlie for doing the Lord's work. All right. So on the question of, did the Flyers think about the AHL conditioning stint, about going that route? Briere said, yeah, we looked into that, but it was another week of him sitting around, not allowed to play. Remember, he would have to be healthy scratch for 5 games in a row. And after that, you're only allowed 2 weeks in the AHL, and you've got to keep him on your NHL roster. I think he means during that time. I don't think it's for the rest of the season. I could be wrong. And then he follows up, that complicates things. There's all kinds of little things like that were coming into play that just made it difficult. So we figured it's best to send him back, have him go play heavy minutes, and get ready for his junior year and hopefully the World Juniors. So to the idea from Evan Atkins here that, it's troubling that they said the decision was easy. I agree. They had hopes that he was going to force their hand. They did. Anybody who tells you otherwise isn't telling you the truth. They hoped that Jett Luchanko was going to come into camp and impress. Because remember last year, we had the round table where it was Briere and Jonesy and Hilf and our crew. And they were raving about Jett Luchanko. They were raving about the mentals. They were raving about the physical ability and about the strength. And Jonesy compared him to a young Rod Brindamore. Like, they had high hopes for this kid. They still do. But the fact that he at no point really looked like he truly, truly belonged with this team, that is troubling. And yeah, again, you could point back to saying he's 19. That's fine. This league continues to have young guys enter the league at this point and find a way to make a meaningful contribution. He did not. Matvei Michkov was technically drafted higher than Luchanko. And yes, I have said many times on the show, so I will not hide it, that I think had he not been Russian, he would have been taken number 2 overall in his draft. But there was Matvei Michkov last year as a very young man, first year in North America. He made an impact. Doesn't mean that every 19-year-old, every 18-year-old, every 20-year-old in the league is going to make a big impact. But I understand why they are potentially disappointed, concerned that they had to send him back. I think the bigger concern and disappointment isn't actually in them having to send Jett back. I think it's where they have to send Jett back to. If they had their druthers, obviously, they'd want to send him to the Phantoms.